All right, hello, this is Jeff Scott of Blackhawk Technical College. I'll be coming at you right now with hopefully at least the first half of Chapter 5 of our Swift book, Beginning iPhone Development with Swift. Chapter 5, which begins on page 137 and is about 35 or 40 pages long, is on rotation and adaptive layout. So it's being able to go back and forth between landscape and portrait, or portrait and landscape, as you see right there. Much like the last chapter, several things that are in this chapter will deal with auto layout and the like. So they'll go into it in even more depth and breadth of coverage than we did in the previous chapter. In the first, there's really two projects that get built in here. And we'll look at the first one in just a minute. The second one deals with something that's called kind of adaptive application layouts. So we'll look at that one in a little bit. All right. So what we end up doing, what we're going to end up doing in here, like I said, is building an app that will allow us to go back and forth between landscape and portrait. All right. And they also mentioned in here down towards the bottom of page 139, the author is talking to you here about points instead of pixels. And they make the point here, no pun intended, that the reason for the change is the Apple's introduction to Retina display, all right, which is a more high resolution screen. All right. One of the things when they came out with the Apple, especially with the iPhone 6, you know, the idea was that you had to come up with something that was going to be up there with the Galaxy 5 and whatever. So they had a bigger screen, and one of the things that Apple has always prided themselves on is the fact that they've always had a really nice type of display, but now they've got it on a bigger surface. All right. So as mentioned here on page 140, as the author says, to handle device notation, you need to specify the correct constraints for all objects that make up the interface. Constraints tell the iOS device how the control should behave when you do resizing. Okay, so we will be going into that, like I said, in just a couple minutes. So we're going to create what's actually a very simple app. They want you to call it orientations, make it a universal app, and like I said, it'll be very, very simple. All right. Okay, the way that we're going to set this up too is it'll be set up to work for portrait, landscape left, and landscape right, not upside down. Whether you realize it or not, what you see right here on page 141, these are the defaults. All right. And it says, have you noticed that upside down is off by default? That's because if the phone rings while it's being held upside down, the phone is not likely to remain upside down, type of an idea. All right. So we're going to come in here now and we're going to start creating our project. Whoops, in just a second. All right. And literally, all right, the first thing they want us to do is to just come up and put a label on the screen that says this way up. Okay, so we'll do that first. So I'm going to start up Xcode, start up a new project. Everything gets taped. All right, so we're supposed to come up and start up a new project, which is what I'm going to do right now. Create a new Xcode project. All right, it'll be single view. And I guess I misspoke before. There's actually 3 projects, but this first one that we do literally will take about 1 or 2 more minutes. And I don't remember what they said to call it, but we're supposed to put a thing in there that says this way up. So I'm just going to do that. That's what I'm going to call it, this way up. All right, and I think it was supposed to be universal. Okay. We'll save this right to the desktop as we've been saving everything else. I'm going to drag a, again, there's, as you see, portrait, landscape left, and landscape right. I could choose upside down if I wanted to, but I don't. Okay. So we're going to go to the main storyboard. And as we have been doing, I'm going to come down here, find a label, drag it up, and change the text to this way up. I think we're supposed to try to make this, basically center this someplace in the middle. There, it looks good. This way up. Now it's probably not totally centered anymore, so let's go back and try to see if we can get it back. So there you go. That's pretty good. All right. So now pretty much our screen looks the way it does on figure 5.3 on page 142 in the book. I guess I should have mentioned something, and that is that what we saw when we first came into our program, let's see, was that over here? Yeah, this stuff, all right, which is your opening screen. You can also get there by bringing up the info.plist that's right here. And it's got most of the same settings right there. Now, do you have to do that? No, but what the author shows you in the book is, as you often see, is there's more than one way of doing the same thing. All right. Okay, so I'm on page 142. We need to add auto layout constraints to pin the label in place before running the app. So control drag from the label upward until the background turns blue. Release the mouse, hold down on the shift key. So let's just do these one at a time here. Okay. So control drag up. Hold down on the shift key and select top space to top layout guide and center horizontally to container. So top space to top layout guide and center horizontally in container. And then press return. All right. Notice we have nothing right now, as far as I can tell, at least that's orange. So I'm going to save this and I'm going to tell it to run. And since in the chapter the author actually breaks this up into 3 sections, including this one, I'll do it the same way. So this first section is going to be quite short. All right. Again, I'm down toward the bottom of page 142 in the text. Oftentimes, I think I've said this to you before, that when I first bring up the simulator, and this is the first time I've had it up today, it runs very slow and I get this unable to run. So I usually just run it again, and normally at least it runs better the second time. Comes up faster, but hopefully it will. So again, I'm on the bottom of page 142, and they tell you to run this and also then change the orientation from portrait, where it is right now, into landscape. All right, so there it is. Okay. Okay, and it's showing you it here, and it looks really good. So let's do a hardware. We'll rotate left. And again, kind of hard to tell from here. This touchpad is being very uncooperative this morning. Well, it's not moving at all, and I thought that it would, because this sure does not look centered. All right. But I'm going to stop and go on here. I'm on the bottom of page 142. Let's configure our view controller to allow a different, smaller set of acceptable orientations. The global configuration for the app specifies a sort of absolute upper limit. If the global config doesn't include an upside down orientation, for example, there's no way that the individual view controller can force it to display upside down. So they want us to come into the viewcontroller.swift file right here. It says here we're going to implement a method defined in the UI view controller superclass that lets us specify what we'll accept. I'm just going to leave all this the way it is and just add my stuff here. Spelled it wrong there. That should be everything. All right, I'm still getting something, because I spelled override wrong here. That might be why. There we go. All right. Okay, they mention here this method lets us return a C-style mask of acceptable orientations. This is iOS's way of asking the view controller if it's okay to rotate to a specific orientation. Here we're returning a value that indicates we'll accept two orientations, the default portrait and an orientation that allows you to turn your phone 90 degrees clockwise so that the left edge is at the top. As mentioned in the textbook here on page 143, it says UIKit defines several orientations, some of which you've already seen, and there's some more here, that are shown about halfway down on the bottom of page 143. So on the very bottom of the page, as it says there, when the iOS device is changed to a new orientation, the supported interface orientations method is called on the active view controller. That the application then determines whether or not it should rotate the view. Okay. Kind of an important point if I turn up to the next page here, and I'm going to show you this, what's in this box here. Doesn't look like a box, but it is one right here. It's now in blue. As it says, iOS actually has two different types of orientations. The one that's being discussed now is interface orientation, but there's also a separate, though related, concept that's known as device orientation. Device orientation, as mentioned, specifies how the device is currently being held, whereas interface orientation is the way the views on the screen are rotated. Okay, as mentioned on the bottom there, if you turn a standard iPhone upside down, the device orientation will be upside down, but the interface orientation will almost be one of the other three. as iPhone does not typically support portrait upside down. All right, that's it for the first third of this, but just to mention this to you quickly, because they showed this on the bottom of page 144, and it goes on to the next page I already did, but it says in Xcode, we want to make another new project based on a single view app and name it Layout. All right, select the main.storyboard, and as they mentioned, one nice thing about using constraints is you can do a lot with little to sometimes no code. It says we do need to specify which orientations we support in code, unless we plan to support only the default set, but the details are specified inside of Interface Builder. So to see how it works, as it mentions, we're going to drag 4 labels and we're going to place them in each corner as shown in figure 5.4. They say let the dash blue guidelines help you line up each one near its respective corner. All right, so we're going to do this. So I'm going to come back here. I don't need the simulator anymore, so I'm going to stop the simulator running. All right, I still have my project up, which didn't have much in it, the one called This Way Up. So I'm going to do a file save. I'm going to do a file close project. I'm going to make sure that's still up and bring up a new pop project. Again, they told us it should be single view, and they said that this should be called Layout. All right, next, create, and we're just supposed to put 4 labels in it. So I'm going to come up to the main storyboard, I'm going to put in my 4 labels, and then I'm going to stop for a while, okay? So we're supposed to move these 4 labels and basically let the system help us with this, and I'm going to put all 4 of them in, and then I think the next thing we're supposed to do is change the names on them. We'll do that too in just a minute. Now they want us to come in here and change these. So they say UL for upper left, UR for upper right, LL for lower left, and LR for lower right. So let's change those right now. So upper left, upper right, lower left, lower right, and let's double check to make sure they are still where they're supposed to be. Okay, that one's fine. That one's fine. Where is it? Let's see what's. That looks like it's right up against the corner. As does that. As does that. And that. So it looks, as of right now, it looks like we have everything as shown on page 145. Set there on the bottom of the page, double click each label and assign a title as I've already shown you. All right, it says after setting up each one, drag them into position so they're evenly lined up with each other in respect to the corners. I've already done that, so I'm also going to come in here and do a file save right now. All right, so the author says, let's see what happens now that we haven't set any auto layout constraints. That's my phone, and that's a time in here that just tells us that this is well, okay, somebody got it. All right, so it says, let's see what happens now that we don't have any auto layout constraints yet set. So let's run it, and let's take a look at it. It says, once the simulator starts up, you'll find that you can only see the label in the upper left and a small part of the one in the lower left. The other 2 are off the screen. Furthermore, the label that started at the lower left is only just visible. Okay, select hardware, rotate left, and you'll find that you can see the top left label and none of the top right. So what should happen when we run this now is we should have something that looks similar to what you see on page 146. So it should look like this in portrait, and it should look like this in landscape. So let's take a look. There it is in portrait. All right, I see the lower left. All right, when I move this, there's my upper left. I could see the lower left, but I had to drag way down to see it. So this is the actual right there. So that is the only one that I'm seeing. All right, and when I do a hardware rotate left, well, that it really isn't that bad. All right, I'm seeing the left and I'm seeing the right. So this isn't exactly the same way that it's being shown in the book here. However, I'm using a different device too. I believe I'm using the iPhone 6 here. So if I go back and stop my simulator, because I could be wrong, but I thought that in this book they used a lot of iPhone 4 for their simulators. So let's take a look. Let's come in here and we'll use a 4S. All right, and we'll run that. Let's do another file save. Just about finished with this first part of the chapter. See that the simulator is smaller now. Here's my splash screen. And there's my UL. It does look now pretty much the way that it does in the book. Okay? And when I do a hardware rotate left, I see the UL and I don't see anything else. Again, very similar to what you see in the book. So as the author mentions, down on the bottom of page 146, as you can see, things aren't looking so good. The top left label is in the right spot after rotating, but all the others are in the wrong places and some of them aren't visible at all. What's happened is that every object has maintained its distance relative to the upper left corner of the view in the storyboard. What we want, as mentioned on the bottom of the page, is to have each label sticking tightly to its nearest corner after you rotate it. The label should shift horizontally to match the new width. In addition to that, when we go back and forth between portrait and landscape, they should basically keep their same relative positions. Fortunately, as mentioned on the bottom of 146 and going on to 147, we can set up these constraints in Interface Builder to make these changes happen for us. I guess I am going to go on a little longer. All right. So it says, in fact, you've seen in earlier chapters, Interface Builder is smart enough to examine this set of objects and kind of figure out what we want. All right, so the author wants us to stop the run here. So we'll stop the simulator. Come back to here and click on our first button. Hold down on Shift and click the remaining buttons. So that as of right now, everything is highlighted. Then go to Editor, Resolve Layoutlet Issues, Add Missing Constraints. It says there are two menu items with this in the same name. In this case, you can use either of them. Well, considering we want to do all views, I'm just going to use that one, Add Missing Constraints. Okay? All right, so let's save this. And let's run it again and see what it looks like. So you can see now, if we look on the screen, we can see all four of our labels, and they do seem pretty symmetrical, and they look pretty nice as far as I can tell. If we go to hardware, rotate left, same thing. All right. So the author mentions that right underneath the second paragraph down in 147, knowing that this works is one thing, but to use constraints like this most effectively, it's important to understand how they work. All right, so we are told to stop our run. And it says back in Xcode, click the upper left label to select it. You'll notice that you see some solid blue lines attached to the label. These blue lines are different from the dashed blue lines that we saw when we were dragging things around. All right. Each of these solid blue lines represents a constraint. So what we're told now is if we open up the size inspector, it says you'll see that it contains a list of constraints. Figure 5.7 on page 148 shows a typical set of constraints, but as it says, the ones that we see might be different. So you can see that in the book here, the author has 16, 559, 20, and 21. Well, some of mine are very close to that. All right, at least the 16 and the on the top and the 20 and 21 on the bottom. I've got 22 and 21 on the bottom. All right. In this case, two of the constraints deal with the label's position relative to its superview, the container view. It specifies the leading space, which generally means the space to the left, and the bottom space, which is the space below the label. These constraints cause the label to maintain the same distance to the bottom and left edges of the superview when the superview size changes. All right. So we are told to grab another label out of our library and drag it over into the layout area. This time, instead of moving it around, it says drag it to the left side of the view, line it up with the view's left edge with the other left labels, center it vertically in the view. The dash lines will help you out. So in other words, we are told to come back in here, grab yet another label, and put it about right there. After placing the left label, give it a title like left. Okay, and I'll double check and make sure that it's all right, looks good. File save, and let's run it again. Right now it doesn't look like it's lined up very well. I can see all of them in this, but let's see what happens when we go into a hardware and do a rotate left. Well, that doesn't look good. It actually pulled it way down to the bottom, as you can see where I've got the mouse currently resting. And pretty much it looks the way that you see in figure 5.9 on page 149. All right, it says we need to create a new constraint to make this work. So go back to Xcode, select the left label in the storyboard, and force the label to be centered vertically, which is easy as it says. So what we want to do, so let's stop the run. And click on here, it's already highlighted. So we're going to say editor, align, vertical center in container. And you've already seen there's other ways of doing this too. All right, now you see the line that we've got going through here. I'm going to do a file save, and I'm going to run the program again. Well, that looks good. But if we go over to hardware and we do a rotate left, actually that looks pretty good right now too. But what's mentioned here in the book on the top of page 150 is the label also needs a horizontal constraint. All right, and that hopefully that'll remove this color line that we see right here. So with it highlighted, sometimes these can be hard to grab, so sometimes you're better to just come back over to here, bring up your document outline. Okay, so editor, resolve auto layout constraints, add missing constraints. All right, you notice now that it's in blue as opposed to what we had before. Let's do another file save, and ideally, at least when we run this, it'll look the same as it did just a second ago. All right, that looks good. And when we do our hardware rotate left, also looking good. All right, so let's stop the simulator. And we're told now to add basically we're supposed to create another label. Line it up with the one that we had on the left. And this one, we should double click and change its text to right. Okay. We want to use the automatic constraints in Xcode to provide us, so with that highlighted, we're going to go to Editor, Resolve Auto Layout Issues, Selected Views, Add Missing Constraints, and hopefully that's been put in there now. Let's do a file save and run the program again. All right. Says that's all fine, but we can do more with just a few clicks. So we're going to do that. I'm going to come back and continue on with this in just a couple minutes.